Yay.
Let's do it.
You ready? Jim Carrey's daughters?
Let's do it.
Oh, let's do it.
Ladies.
Oh, your number's still 911? Alrighty then.
Alrighty.
Welcome to the latest episode of Authenticated with your host, Kate McLeod. I am intrigued by people. People watching, I love. People learning, that's where I'm insatiably curious. I'm interested in the why and how of the creative mind's pattern of thinking, the subtext to the creative thinker, or in its more conscious and malleable form, the creative conscious. Because when you are so clear on yourself via the triad of consciousnesses, then you become reflective to others. Meeting yourself is an infectious practice because what feels good is infectious and something I think we could all use a good dose of. So join me in conversations with a diverse arsenal of creative thinkers, from artists to entrepreneurs to serial thinkers ready to optimize their creative conscious. With me, self-made and self-proclaimed creative entrepreneur. Sounds hot, right? I'm here with Megan Timpane, who is a dear friend, an absolutely wonderfully talented artist. And what's your title at work?
I am technically a corporate trainer, which means I teach executive communication. I teach people how to be more confident, basically, or how to project confidence and credibility.
I've always thought that communications translated so well from acting because you have a background in acting. That's what you originally studied.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a theater major at UCLA and did a ton of theater throughout, ever since I was maybe 6 years old, and musicals, improv, all that good stuff. I did improv at Groundlings after graduating and went to the British Academy of Dramatic Arts at Oxford and studied Shakespeare, and then decided it wasn't for me and somehow ended up in this profession, which felt perfectly serendipitous, I suppose.
So that evolution of Megan, going from there and then transitioning now into communications, what was that kind of like?
Well, in my mid-20s or so, I had somewhat of a perspective shift, and I just came back into the industry after a little hiatus and just decided that it wasn't for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I just didn't like this idea of someone else telling me that I was worth something or valuable, and it's such a hard industry. It just, a lot of it felt about like who you know and what you look like, and at least in the early stages, not as much about talent. And I think I got frustrated and burnt out really early. And so I was working in retail for a while as my side gig. I always was interested in fashion and ended up working in every single position you can imagine in one store with one company. I worked at Michael Kors for 10 years and ended up doing some corporate work and doing recruiting in retail. And then I moved to Rent the Runway, where I was a recruiter. And then I somehow found my company and looking for a position in L&D somewhere. And they referred me to this company that I work for called Speech Skills. And it's all about teaching people how to project confidence and credibility. And it's teaching executive communication. And it seems like a perfect mix of all the things that I had talent in and interest in, and I could make some money in.
Yeah.
which is always nice.
But it just sounds like that was a thing that you needed to give yourself, if you needed that stability or if you needed to sort of leave that field of waiting for someone else to give you permission as opposed to just like giving yourself your own. So when you transitioned, did it feel like that was already in your wheelhouse, or did it feel like you had to like adjust a little bit to get there?
Well, I think actors tend to be really good corporate trainers because we aren't afraid of public speaking. And I think a lot of it is just an issue of courage and just being willing to stand up in front of people and liking standing up in front of people. But when I got into it, I'm not going to say it was easy. Yeah, I had a natural inclination towards it, but I went through 9 months of training pretty much every single day of consistent work with my boss or shadowing people or learning scripts and watching coaching and things like that. So I wouldn't say it was easy. I definitely felt like I was in learner mode for a long time. And when you're really good at something for a long time and then you jump into something brand new, it really definitely hits your ego a little bit. And you think that you're going to be great because you got the job, but it doesn't necessarily translate that way until you've been trained in that industry. So
yeah, well, especially for actors, I find typically that's like the I knew I wanted to do this for so long. And so there has to be kind of like an ego death as you transfer that skill set to something else. But then you're really, really good at that because you've climbed the ranks and been very successful in communication since making that transition. So you have two things that you are essentially an expert in. So how are they both working together now?
Well, it's funny because, and I think I was saying this to you a couple of days ago, but I don't even consider myself an actor anymore. I technically still act because I have a one-woman show right now that I brought back, that I initially wrote and performed 10 years ago, that I recently brought back. But I consider myself a corporate trainer. Like, I'm very immersed in that industry. I consider myself an expert in what I do.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm really good at what I do now. And they lend themselves nicely to one another because I get to have a little bit more freedom in what I coach now. And now that I'm an expert, and I get to bring in a little bit of my acting background and things like that to make my coaching more nuanced. So yeah, I feel like an expert in my current field, but then I also am dipping my toes back into acting, but it's my own story. So it's not quite the same as if I were to be going out and auditioning again and waiting to be called upon or things like that. Like, I'm creating my own thing. And so therefore you naturally feel like more of an expert, but there is a level of vulnerability to it. Absolutely.
I find that a lot of my friends who are artists, and you know this very well too, having many as well, and also a lot of clients, it's like to not identify with a certain boxification of something, even if that's just to say an actor. I think it's so interesting that you don't feel aligned with that because that's not what it is. And I think that having your own definition of these titles and conveying that is actually what is super important, especially now where I've been asked the question a lot, oh, so you gave up acting. You're now you're a creative entrepreneur. It's like, no, I'm that. And it's just also, isn't acting creative entrepreneurship? Isn't it just like inventing creative spaces that align with someone else's vision, that make someone else feel seen? Like, isn't it all the same thing?
Yeah, it's all in the same wheelhouse. I think it's kind of like the same bucket, if you will.
Yeah.
But like you said, they lend themselves nicely to one another, whether it's my career and the acting or what it is that you're doing and acting and producing and all of those things. It's still a creative endeavor. It's still a form of self-expression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you've really made a platform that can support you right now and what you're doing. So your show, Lymphomaniac, is going to the Fringe Festival in Scotland.
Yeah.
Are you excited?
I'm pretty stoked. I have to say, it's a weird full circle moment. So for those of you who are listening who don't know already, Lymphomaniac is a one-woman show that I wrote 10 years ago. And the initial version was written 10 years ago. I was diagnosed with cancer at age 22, and I went through treatment. I had stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma. I went through 7 months of chemo. And coming out of this, I ended up writing and performing this one-woman show. And I performed it off and on for 3 years between San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Ventura County. And shortly after that, I came back to the industry, decided I didn't want to do that anymore. As I just explained, got into retail, all those things. And then my 10-year cancer-versary, if you will, of being cancer-free, so my remission anniversary, came about this past year, and a theater in San Francisco asked if I would consider bringing the show back. And I said no at first. I was like, what are you talking about? I don't do this anymore.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they asked me a year ago, December, and I said no because I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not an actor. I don't do that anymore. And then my official tenure of being diagnosed came around, and I thought, well, why not? I have some thoughts. A lot's changed in 10 years. And so as I let it marinate, I said, yeah, sure, why not? And started writing again, I guess, this fall, and performed in December. But long story short, in terms of the Fringe, when I went to the Fringe, I went 11 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. When I was in college, I was studying at the British Academy of Dramatic Arts at Oxford, and a bunch of the people who were studying with me, we all took the train up to Edinburgh. And I had actually fainted on the first day of the program at BADA hit my face, got a black eye, ended up making up a Lady Macbeth monologue in front of the world's leading Shakespeare experts because I couldn't remember my monologue. So I'm literally standing there making up Shakespeare, one of the world's most famous monologues. And what's funny is one of the people was a professor at UCLA who I ended up having later at UCLA. And he, as I graduated, came up to me and said, "So what the hell happened at Bada? What happened? Why did you make up a monologue? It was so strange. We were all very confused." And I was like, well, I'd fainted and hit my head that morning. I even had like vomit in my hair. It was so embarrassing. But the reason for it, I didn't know. I was actually sick at the time. And I was having symptoms and I didn't know what was going on with my body. And when I took the train up to Edinburgh after Bada, I felt so sick and like I was going to pass out that I contemplated going to the emergency room, but I ended up not, and like got there, saw friends, got distracted, and it didn't happen. So it's this weird like full circle moment for me of going back to the place where I started having symptoms of cancer 11 years ago or so.
Yeah.
So it means not just something as an artist and as a bucket list item, but also as a personal thing to overcome, if you will.
Absolutely.
Of changing the narrative.
Mm-hmm. I have a long-winded, multi-part question about this. So you've been revisiting this show that you performed and had completed for the time being. For those who are just listening, I just did air quotes, completed. Nothing is really ever complete. So this thing that you completed 10 years ago, that version of you stands there. Mm-hmm. And now you're rewriting it as this new version of yourself that has evolved, that has lived a life. Art emulates life, life emulates art. You know, all these things, you've gained all this knowledge. And so you just spent an entire rehearsal period of you revisiting version of you 10 years ago. So with what you gained from that perspective on writing a show that is literally about you, not only is it your own IP, it's your story. What do you think, with that knowledge, is going to be waiting for you from the 12 years ago version of Megan who was in Edinburgh when you get there with this show?
I think it's going to be really emotional. I have to say, even just writing this show in the fall, part of writing the show in the first place was processing what had happened. And it was a really cathartic experience. It helped me process some trauma. And it got me to a place in my life where I was like, oh, okay, I can kind of put a bow on this and walk away. And as I reopened this can of worms, I realized there was a lot there that had not been resolved. Mm-hmm. And it was really emotional. And it was honestly much scarier this time to perform this version of the show because it feels much more raw. It's about all the things that have been unseen since having cancer. So things like anxiety, and I had developed an eating disorder and had PTSD and had to go through some intense therapies, and it felt very vulnerable. So doing it this year as I go to the Fringe, I think I'm going to anticipate, even though the work on the show for the most part is done, minus some minor adjustments here and there, I think it's going to be really emotional to be there and to re-experience the whole festival in a new way. I think it'll I truly think it's going to feel very full circle. And once again, this idea of serendipity.
Yeah.
Like this was meant to happen. I was meant to come back here.
I love that because you've gone through your journey solo as Megan Timpane. You've gone through this journey, giving yourself what you need and like pivoting in acts that are of best service to you. And it kind of seems like that's what you're getting back. Are you like aware of that transference of energy of like giving that and receiving that?
Yeah, lately I've been really struck by this idea of dharma, and I don't want to mischaracterize it for anyone who's
give us your definition.
Anyone who's listening, but what I've taken from that is this idea that what you're putting out, you're getting back in the same amount. Mm-hmm. And I truly feel like I'm getting so much out of this personally and developmentally for myself and mentally and physically, all of the things, and emotionally. But I also truly feel of service in this moment. Like, I feel like the show is something bigger than me. The message is bigger than me. And it feels like those are in equal measure currently. So it feels like right place, right time sort of thing, which is totally this transference of energy. Like, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And I also truly believe in momentum. And I feel like there has been good momentum on this. And I'm just flowing in the direction of that movement, basically. And I haven't really hit any major roadblocks so far.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're coming.
I'm finding wood.
But yeah, thank you. But yeah, I'm just moving in the direction of the way things are currently moving. And doors have just been opening and opening and opening, which is really cool.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful way of life to practice living because it's such an active way of listening. And I think that when we tend to live in the past or try to live in the future, that it just distracts us from what is presently available. And it sounds like you have a very active approach to actively thinking about what is actively happening.
Yeah, and I think I'll be real with you. When I was an actor, I was 20, 21 years old coming out of college, I was an asshole. Like, I was so about the ego. I was like, yeah, I got really good representation coming out of college and like all this, you know, I was like, yeah, the casting directors, they know me. Like, I'm exactly what they're looking for. Like, I had this little like ego about me. And I think you have to have that to a certain extent. Like, you've got to believe in yourself, but you can't let the ego overcome you.
Yeah. Well, because it's too hard not to have the ego.
Totally. Yeah. And as an actor, you got to back yourself, right? If you don't back yourself, nobody's going to. But I think, honestly, having cancer really sucked a lot of that ego right out of me. You know, you're literally stripped bare. Like, you have nothing. I didn't even have eyebrows. I didn't have hair, right? So you were literally stripped bare in front of everyone. And that was really what brought on the perspective shift. And eventually what ended my relationship with the industry. But then coming back into it, I still don't even feel like I'm part of the industry, even though I'm literally going to a theater festival in Scotland amongst all these other actors and performers. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just there. I'm just there to do the show. But it's not, I don't consider it to be like a theater piece, even though it is. But it feels much less about my ego and much more about, I actually believe that there's a message here that is helpful to people. And I believe that I'm doing this in service of that message. So it feels much more altruistic than it did previously, or than my art did previously. And it just feels more authentic, if you will, and just true to where I'm at right now, without putting anything on, without having any airs about me.
Yeah. I feel like that's a sticky perspective shift too, because it would be so easy to say, well, why are you avoiding taking on the title of actor? But what's so cool is you're not taking it on because that's just not what feels real to you right now, because the art, the piece, it has just become bigger than just you being seen. It's about like all these other versions of you being seen too. So in terms of authenticity and being seen, how would you define those two things for yourself?
Well, I think authenticity is so nuanced. Like, it really depends on the person and what your own personal definition of authenticity is. And I just believe that when you're in alignment with when how you're acting is in alignment with how other people are seeing you, that's being authentic. And I'm getting up on that stage and I'm leaving it all on the table. I'm being so raw. As an example, I literally, for the folks at home, I literally shit my pants on stage in front of people. Okay, so I'm leaving it. It's a comedy, just as a side note. But I'm literally leaving it all out there.
Yeah.
So there is no room for me to not be authentic in the show. Like, I'm telling you my story, and you can take it as a performance, or you know, I am a performative person. I do impersonations, I do voices, things like that in the show. But it's also just my story. And so, yeah, if you want to call me an actor, great. If you want to call me a performer, great. If you want to call me a trainer or a public, like I do public speaking for a living. If you want to call me a public speaker, yeah, it's a form of that. But I think being wedded to any sort of identity can be dangerous, because then you pigeonhole yourself. I didn't think that this was going to happen. I didn't think I'd ever get back into acting, but here I am. And I'm trying to just not think too much about the label.
Yeah.
And just go with what feels right.
Well, I think that's the hard thing too, because the label means so much for people's relative understanding. It's the common language we all speak. But I resonate with what you're saying because I always want to introduce myself as Kate McLeod. Mm-hmm. And I want that to suffice to be enough without me having to tell you everything else I do. Because what I feel like I'm doing now, and I think this speaks to your definition of authenticity too, is I'm just being myself. I'm thinking out loud. I'm sharing what would be my inner quiet life publicly because I feel like it's going to resonate with someone else. I feel like it's going to give verbiage to someone else's unnamed feelings or life or experience so that they can better find theirs. Like, you know, as friends, you get to hear about me talk about this all the time, but it's like for me 3 and my community there and my curriculum there is I don't want to take over people's minds. I don't want people to be thinking about Kate McLeod constantly. I want people to get a very clear image of Kate McLeod so that they can think of themselves and just be overwhelmed in their own minds with like their own thoughts and who they are. And I think that's what's so cool about this space, because even though there is a performative element and you are putting on a show because people are coming to be entertained, it's almost like the levity that comes in comedy when you give someone a moment to laugh so that they can cry later. It's this performative nature so we can all get it and be like, we're going to see a show. But what we all are actually signing up to do is to be seen ourselves by watching someone else being seen.
Totally. And we're all composed of various identities, right? Like we're all composed of so many things. Yeah, I'm a corporate trainer and I'm performing the show. I also play basketball. I also love art. I also we're all mutts to a certain extent, right?
I hope so.
Like
Makes it fun.
But it's true. We all are, and there's so many components to what makes us authentically ourselves. And I'm just using the tools that have helped me throughout my life in the show and hoping that it helps someone else. And for me, a big part of that is humor. Like I've always been interested in comedy. The show itself is a comedy. But as you mentioned, obviously there's this component of sadness in it because I'm talking about having had cancer and addressing something that is a really, really difficult topic for some people. And then I'm also addressing anxiety. I'm addressing PTSD. I'm addressing eating disorders, stomach issues. All pretty girls have IBS. But as you mentioned, like I hope people feel seen in this show and reflected in the show, not because they're like, oh, my story is just like that. No, I hope that they find 1 or 2 little things in the show that they can take away that might be helpful, or a new perspective shift, or they hear me vocalize a thought that they've had and haven't been able to vocalize themselves.
Yeah. I'm getting a visual from what you're saying, and that is like a lake. Like a glass lake, but if you take a big rock and you throw it and it plops into part of the glass lake, there are going to be ripples that come after. And you have to acknowledge them. So it kind of just feels like you're acknowledging this. And you're also talking about like your tools. Like these are all not isolated because they're all related, but essentially isolated parts of your life where things happened and you had to acknowledge them and deal with them. And you also had to let them evolve you, because no one leaves new circumstances like unchanged unless that's just like stubbornness, but then that's also stagnation. So it sounds like you've been like riding the Megan waves, just like always.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the moral of the show, if you will, or the conclusion of the show, not to give it away, but to give it away, is that healing isn't linear and it's not just something that ends one day. So whether it's from cancer or whether it's from any sort of moment in your life that has shifted things for you, it could be something as difficult as a trauma. It could not. And obviously this is all based off of everyone's own perspective. But we still have to address the things that happen throughout our lives as we go. It's not like things, you just close a chapter on something and it's done. No, you're comprised of all these varying events that have happened in your life, and your identity is comprised of all of those things. And you may not identify with some of them as much as you did before, but they're still there. And if we acknowledge that they're there, we're able to then forgive ourselves when they do pop up for parts of ourselves showing up, maybe like anxiety or, whatever else it might be that we're feeling ashamed of, or we're feeling like shouldn't be a part of our identity anymore because we've worked on it, or we've decided, like as an actor, I've decided not to do that anymore. So now I'm ashamed that this is coming back up. No, it's still a part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting when you say, oh, I thought I worked on it. Yeah, but the version of you right now hasn't worked on it. So it is a constant reassessment of just like, how do I feel about this? Like, how is this sitting with me today? Because even though I might have felt healed from this yesterday, today I might not. And that's because I'm just a different person today. So healing isn't linear, and it's something that you're going to deal with forever.
Yeah. And like I said, like we're constantly changing and evolving, but we still are comprised of the things that have just happened in our lives. I know that sounds so woo-woo, but it's true. We only have the perspective that we have from the things that have happened to us. And even if, like I said, we've emotionally dealt air quotes with things or resolved internally, things like that, they can still pop up. And they may, and it may not be tomorrow. It may not be in 10 years. It might be in 15 years. It might be like when you're on your deathbed. Who knows? But
yeah,
that's okay. That's also okay. And just accepting that that's happening is allowed.
And also just like those are signals from your brain and your your whole self just being like, hi, can we focus on this a little bit more?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, let's figure out what else is going. And all that reveals is just more of like yourself.
Totally. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's your identity now. That, as an example, like let's say your anxiety pops up one day and you haven't been anxious in 2 years. And then the whole day you sit there and you think, I'm so frustrated with myself for being anxious today because I haven't been anxious in 2 years. And this probably happens every time I get anxious still to this day. I'm like, wait a second, we worked on this? What's going on? But it doesn't mean you're an anxious person anymore. It just means you're having anxiety in that moment. So the more we can release those, once again, labels, the more we're able to then move through the emotion or like move through that moment and move on to the next thing.
Well, yeah, because that's the brain trick of absolutes, where if we make this absolute, then we have the answer now and then we're safe because we know everything. And it's like, no, actually, I think it's actually about retraining your nervous system to be okay not knowing right now and knowing that we're just experiencing something right now and for a reason, and that's just to be human. And then, but if you allow that compassion for yourself, you're actually going to get resolve at the end of it. And you actually are going to adapt those things that you learn about yourself and continue moving along. It's just part of what has to happen. And so if you can kind of like figure out how to enjoy the ride there, not that you're going to have fun being anxious or experiencing symptoms of PTSD, but if you give yourself compassion to know that this is just something that happens, at least you might create a little bit more like intellectual, emotional safety around it during the time.
And it's acceptance and not complacency. It's saying, yeah, this is happening right now. Like I'm feeling jealous right now, or I'm feeling angry right now. I don't want to feel this way, but this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Without resenting yourself or shaming yourself for it, letting it happen, but then not getting complacent and letting it fester so much to the point where you're not functional.
Correct. And so now that you are in this realm and you're honoring this other facet of yourself and you've opened this other door, I keep thinking of like, what are those like mirror houses in, you know what I mean? In at circuses.
Like a fun house.
A fun house. Yeah. I just see like another one opening up where it's like more Megan, but it's like, as you're doing that, how is that informing you and your clients with communication?
Yeah, great question. I think, well, one, it's actually opened up a lot more intimate conversations with my clients. I actually feel like I've connected with my clients a lot more on a personal level lately. And I think that comes with having more clients, just, being 5.5, 6 years into my career and really having a very strong client base. And I'm now at the place that, like I said, like I'm at expert level of what I do with my current company. And I now have people that know me and request me and things like that. So you tend to build relationships based off of that. But I feel now more open to having more colloquial conversations outside of just the hi, how are you? What are you doing? Like, how can I help you? And then diving in, there's this openness and excitement. When you're excited about something, there's an energy.
Yeah.
And it makes other people excited for you. And energy is contagious. And I think I'm coming into my meetings now with clients where I'm excited about the other stuff that I'm working on in my personal life.
Well, because you know how good it feels to do that.
It feels good. And it's also inspiring to my clients to be saying, they ask me how I'm doing. And instead of just being like, I'm good, I say, I'm great. I've been working on X, Y, Z. And then it creates this whole new dynamic. They're excited about the show. They want to figure out how to support me. And we end up having deeper conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no longer just a business interaction, but it's developing relationships. And I think that's part of feeling comfortable. And I am in this work, or in the work of doing my show, stepping into a very authentic, raw, vulnerable version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's inspiring to my clients. Like I'm literally teaching them how to project confidence and credibility. And I'm stepping into something that, though it feels scary and, like I said, raw, vulnerable, all those things, when you step into it and you do it and you get a good response, it instills confidence in you. It's no longer projecting confidence. It is confident.
It's making tangible the intangible, which is the transference of energy.
Uh-huh.
And so you sitting down with them and teaching them these skills, but then you also telling them how you're putting them into practice in your life. I mean, that's just practice what you preach, you know, it's adding to your credibility, but also not just by you telling them, people can see that. That's the thing that people feel, you know, the more you diversify. Because when I was acting full time and waiting for people to call me in for an audition and waiting for people to give me an offer and all this waiting, it's like, I'm the kid who's waiting. I'm the girl who waits around and waits for permission. And that's just not, that wasn't fulfilling to me, and that wasn't exciting to anybody else, because what do I have to offer? And so now when things pick up, because I'm like, oh, well, I just produced this. We just won these, you know, we just went to this festival and like won these accreditations and, you know, whatever. It's like that picks up, or it's like, hey, I just started this community, or I also have this podcast. It's like no one's going to trust you to do something that they don't already see evidence of you doing or being able to do.
It's inspiring and it's magnetic. So it draws them to you, and it also forces them to look at themselves and hopefully inspires them to then, and gives them permission, like that Marianne Williamson quote, gives them permission to do something on their own, gives them the permission to have courage to do something themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a communal foundation build, almost, it feels like.
Yeah, and it's very much grounded, once again, in this idea of authenticity. Whereas, like, you know, there's so many people who, once again, air quotes, cheer you on throughout your life. But when they're cheering you on because they're genuinely excited about what you're excited about, and they're then not necessarily copying you, but they're then doing, or they're then inspired to do something on their own for
empowered by
themselves. Yeah, that I think is the biggest form of flattery. It's not copying, but it's feeling inspired and then taking off on your own trajectory.
That's a trick I was kind of trying to suss out for myself a few weeks ago, where I would have a thought or an idea, like for content, or an idea for a Substack. And then I would go online, I would consume other people's content, and I would see what I was thinking about. And I'm like, whoa. So at first I was like, oh, how did they get my idea? But then I just thought, no. I'm just on a certain frequency that happens to be matched. And it makes sense because it's in the environments I'm already in, whether virtual or in real life. It just tells me that I'm able, capable, and currently receiving too. I'm listening as much as I'm speaking.
Yeah. Have you heard the idea of, I'm going to misuse this phrasing, but it's like negative confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias.
I think that's what it's called, but I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Oh, yeah? Oh, which one?
Which one? No, our brains, so our amygdalas, the most primitive part of our brain, the back of our brains, are wired to sense danger so that we can save ourselves and not die and
Also,
evolve.
we can not die.
Yeah, and evolve. But now how that presents itself is anxiety about literally anything. We're looking to confirm our negative bias constantly. But there have been a lot of experiments, and you can try this at home, where if you look for the positive, you can do the same thing as well, but on the flip side of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much harder. You have to do it more manually, whereas the negative comes very much automatically to us because it is evolutionarily ingrained into us. But you can do it positively. So as an example of that, like if you were to say, you can think of a shape, any shape, like a heart or something, and you say, today I'm gonna look for a heart. In the next 24 hours, I'm gonna see a heart. And throughout the day, you're gonna be looking around, you're just gonna be a lot more aware. And if you see a heart anywhere, there's your confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a heart exists when you didn't think that you would see one. And let's say you hadn't seen a heart or a shape of a heart for like 3 weeks, or you had never noticed it. Now you're noticing it all of a sudden. And it inspires you to continue to start noticing things like that. And you might see 5 hearts in a day, whereas the day before you saw none. So this idea of putting out this positive energy and continuing to look for the good things, it's not that the good things aren't there. It's just that we're not seeing them. And so it's a matter of training our brains to look for the positive, not necessarily just be like, be positive, right? But it's training your brain to continue that positive momentum, if you will.
Yeah.
Because you'll start seeing, like, we've all experienced those feelings of flow or like feelings of momentum before, when a bunch of things start going right all at once, in the same way that a bunch of things can go wrong all at once. Like when it rains, it pours. It works in the opposite direction as well. So you've got to just get yourself moving in that direction for it to begin.
You do. This is so much of what I consult on. So I love that, because it's clearly in your work too.
Yeah.
And what I love about having friendships in my life now where people do just totally different things, we do so much of the same. And when our brains are seeking out negative confirmation bias, it's so that we can arrive to no, because no is stagnant. No is stay right here. And I know I'm not dying right here, right now, so I'm going to stay here. But when you start looking for the positive, you start looking for your own evidence to support what it is that you want to think, to support the life you want to live. It becomes this like infectious practice where you just feel unstoppable and like nothing can get in the way, because look at all this evidence that is supporting what I'm feeling or where I'm going or what I want to do right now.
Totally. And it's like what you were mentioning earlier about, now I'm going into auditions and I'm saying, well, I'm producing, and when the casting director says, well, what are you up to right now? Instead of being like, well, I had a callback last week for another show. No. I'm also producing. I'm doing this like YouTube channel. I've got my podcast. Like I'm doing this, that, and the other. There's a different energy. It doesn't matter what the projects are.
Yeah.
There's a different energy that you bring to the table when you're doing things for yourself that are in the direction of what you want to do. And it may have nothing to do with that audition that you're in, but I guarantee you're showing up to that audition differently than you would if you were just working your part-time job and then going to auditions.
Yeah.
And being upset that the industry is like not doing its thing and being hit by all these external factors. What is within your control? Like what can you do?
Well, for the arts too, I think there's I can't think of the word right now. Predisposition? Yeah. That's the word.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. Especially in the arts, there's this like predisposition where it's like, oh, well, if you can't support yourself by your art, then like, are you really doing art? And it's like, that's just not the world we live in anymore. And as a species, we've just adapted to be too multifaceted anyway for us to just like do one thing. I think that that's like a passive pattern to fall into, where it's like I leave, because I fell into it too. I left school, I got a serving job, and I was auditioning. And it's like, okay, so I'm not actually in that doing anything for myself beyond giving myself my basic needs, which is income to support a roof over my head and food on the table, and like be able to enjoy New York and be able to audition when I need to. Like, sure, that gives me my basic needs, but it requires so much more than that.
Yeah. And I think one thing I struggled with as an when I considered myself to be an actor, but one thing I struggled with when I was actively acting or trying to actively act was when people would ask you what you do and you say you're an actor.
Yeah.
And then there's this weird shame around when they say, well, what are you in right now? And you're like, well, nothing. Actually, nothing. Because there's this association of making money off of your art or being in a big TV show or being in some sort of large production as determining your worth as an actor or your validity as that identity. And it doesn't have to be. And I think that's like a common misconception about this industry. You could be in a scene study class and be considered an actor where you're literally paying someone else to act.
Oh, absolutely.
And still be an amazing actor and that be a part of your identity. Like that's absolutely valid. Or you could be working on your own thing or doing stand-up at a local comedy club that 3 people go to on a week on like a Tuesday night, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the more we eliminate this shame around not making money off of your art, the more we can decide our own identities, or at least a facet of our identity, and feel really grounded in that versus feeling sort of this feeling of shame or.
Yeah. Well, I think it also changes our idea of what art can look like that can sustain you. Because I think that being human is innately art. Like I think everyone is an artist.
Totally.
You think your thoughts that no one else thinks. I've always wondered like what it would be like. I'm like, oh, if I could just like be behind that person's eyes, I would love to see how they see the world. And I think that's because I'm so excited genuinely about my perspective on the world. I love the way that I think, and I have so much fun up here. I have so much fun in my own brain. And I think that that's like a artistic practice that everyone is capable of.
Totally. And this is actually brings up something that I do in my day job. And so I play this game with some of my clients called Expert. And could be considered an acting exercise, I guess. But essentially what it is I give them a gibberish word and I have them define that gibberish word. And I say, you are the world's leading expert on this gibberish word. Whatever you say about this gibberish word is right. You don't need to be clever. You don't need to be funny. Whatever comes to mind, don't plan ahead. Just go with it. No self-commenting, so no little laughs at yourself or like, oh, that was so bad or, whatever. Just commit to it. And it's not even working on any of our skills. It's just play expert, whatever that means to you. And the people who really succeed at this exercise are the people who don't judge themselves and allow themselves to go wherever they go. And I've heard so many interesting, imaginative ideas. And I always say leading into this exercise, I say, it's such a natural inclination to want to judge yourself as you're doing this. But take this as an opportunity, as the one moment in your day as an adult living in the world that we live in, to let your mind just go wherever it goes. And you never get to be the world's leading expert on something in a day. Even if you find yourself really confident in who you are, there's always some sort of sense of doubt. And I go, let your imagination fly. We rarely have opportunities to let our imagination go as expansively as it might when we were a kid, let's say. Kids are just creative geniuses, literally levels of creative genius. Most kids are at that level because they're very uninhibited in their thinking, in their imagination. And the more people let themselves go and don't shame themselves as they go, the more expansive their thinking is and the more interesting it is for me to listen to.
Yeah.
And it's just this idea of like, we all have the ability to be artists, and we all probably are to a certain extent artists and creative in our own right. But I think we confine ourselves in our daily lives with our routines and with what we consider to be our identities. And that limits our ability to be imaginary, make believe, envision things, even just envisioning positive things for ourselves that are actually totally probable can feel really difficult for some people.
That exercise reminds me of the board game Boulder Dash.
I don't know it.
Boulder Dash is, except they're real words, but they seem not. They are the words you've never heard before, but you can kind of pick apart into, pre, middle, and end and kind of figure out what they mean. And so then everyone writes down on a piece of paper what they think it means, and then they present it, and then they actually learn what it means. But I like your exercise more because I would go a little bit beyond that, and maybe you do in the exercise with your clients. But if you are the expert, if you're the leading expert on this and you get to be the expert in this moment, what feelings does that bring up for you? And then how can you implement those feelings now today? So how can you take this pattern and mock it into your own life so you do that?
Yeah.
I can tell that.
At the end of it, I always say to them, if you can be an expert in something that literally does not exist, that you just made up, you can certainly be an expert in the things that do exist, that you do know a lot about throughout your day. So if you can find a way to tap into that, because a lot of what I work on is hard skills. Well, they're technically soft skills, but they're very tangible. It's
What's the difference between hard and soft skills?
Well, hard skills are more tangible. Soft skills are like, hard skills are like, let's say your ability to make like a spreadsheet or, whatever. Soft skills are like how you speak to someone, how you make them feel when you talk, things like that.
Tangible and intangible. Okay.
Yeah. Although soft skills can be tangible as well. So things like I teach my clients where to use their hands, when to use their hands, how to speak in downward inflection, how to make strong eye contact. How many seconds do you look at each person? What feels appropriate from the listener's perspective? Things like that. Tone of voice, all of those things. And this is a more nuanced note. So for people who might not be able to do more than one skill at a time, because it can feel a lot like tapping your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, giving them this note, play the expert. We've all seen an expert before, and you can emulate that. I say, if you can't imagine what you as an expert looks like, think about someone in a movie or someone you've seen before who acts like an expert. I always say like Miranda Priestly in Devil Wears Prada. She's like an expert in her field. Like be Miranda Priestly for a minute. We all know what that is like, and we can all turn that on a little bit. You don't have to be the world's greatest actor, but like you said, it's a feeling.
It is a feeling.
Throw that feeling on, and we know what that looks like. And we know what that feels like in our body.
And we're all capable of it too.
Totally capable of it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And also once you start practicing this, and confidence just comes down to a lot of it, but I think that the foundation of confidence is just believing in yourself and believing yourself. And I think that's the hard thing too, because it's very hard to even trust that you're the own expert on yourself. Because we have so many outside exterior influences constantly. And we're in an age of constantly consuming information from other people, and we're always listening to something, we're always reading something, we're always watching something. And so I think that gives away a lot of our power. And so the practice of confidence is going to have to come into play a little bit more so we can remember what our own thoughts are, because a lot of what I'm working on with clients right now is, why do you think that? Is that a pattern that actually genuinely works for you, or is that something that someone told you is going to genuinely work for you? Because sometimes it's hard to remember. You can't remember where it came from because you've been practicing it for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was talking about this in therapy yesterday. And
we love therapy.
To go on a different tangent, but I promise I'll land the plane, is that I went on a date this week. LOL. Dating in New York is awful. And for the first time in a really long time, I didn't care what the outcome was. And I know, I'm in my 30s and I'd love for things to be a certain way. I'm not going to say what that is, but you can guess. But I just kind of didn't care what the outcome was in terms of that person liking me or not liking me, whether or not it was going to be my life partner or not. And I think it's because I've had so much going on lately where I feel a lot of integrity in what I'm doing. And I think integrity can feel very linked to feeling confident. It's where you say you're going to show up, and then you show up the way that you say that you are.
Yeah.
And I've been fundraising for the show, and I said I was going to fundraise X amount by X time, and I'm further along than I thought, and that instills confidence. I'm like, I said I was going to do it, and I did it.
You're looking for your evidence, and you're
Exactly.
seeing your evidence.
Exactly. And that to me feels like a very grounded version of confidence. And I think that in tandem with accepting that you don't always have a definition for who you are in any given moment, that it's in flux, that it changes, and just accepting that, but showing up for yourself as best you can and as often you can in the things that matter to you the most, I think make you feel more rooted, more grounded in yourself and in your identity. Even if you're unable to define what that is, there are tangibles in integrity. I showed up for myself in X way this week. I said I was going to go to the gym. I went to the gym. I said I was going to do this. I did that. Your actions are reflective of who you actually are.
Mm-hmm. Well, because that's all writing your own manual, your user manual of you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't know how to solve a problem and you go to the page where it's supposed to be and you don't know. Like, it is impossible for you to expect other people to treat you or see you or receive you a certain way unless you are actually showing them how to do that for you. Because human variation is vast. And so what works for one person is not going to work for all people. And if you're not practicing these things for yourself, and if you're not talking to yourself this way, if you're not seeing your own value, how the hell do you expect anybody else to see it?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about with showing up at an audition, saying I'm an actor, but you're not doing anything outside of showing up at the auditions.
Yeah.
And if you can show up to that audition and say, well, I'm an actor. I am working on this project that I'm acting in. I'm going to scene study class. I'm doing this. There's conviction. There's integrity in that because you are literally in the act of practicing acting.
But so long it's your act of practicing acting and not your act of checking like boxes for other people. Do you know what I mean? Because like that's the hard part for me is like you're checking off the boxes because someone else says like that's what's of value. That's not helpful. Like your version looks different. It's how you are. Just the example of acting, it's like how are you showing up and feeling like you are an actor here?
Well, that box is more likely to then get checked of being a professional working actor if you are doing all the other things that actually determine whether or not you are an actor, not a working actor.
Correct.
Like you're more likely to check off that list of things that feed our ego, like getting a series regular role versus just being in a scene study class and having an amazing scene that you just did with someone and walking away feeling really proud. Like that can feel like such an accomplishment. And then you get to that audition, you're like, I just nailed that scene.
Yeah. I'm
feeling really good.
I'm in a scene study class that I absolutely love. And I learned this about myself as opposed to I'm in a scene study class. Yeah. So it's like, I think also there is in this process, like the constant check-in of yourself of like asking yourself, is this what's still serving me? Or am I just here because I thought I should be?
Right. And you give more weight to other people's decisions what they think of you when you're not determining for yourself what you do.
Yeah.
What you think of you.
Yeah. When you determine something for yourself and you're like, I feel satiated in this way, that's going to transfer as opposed to like, I want you to perceive me as being, it's just like, just focus on it, the feeling for you. And with that, I'm curious, like, how has your being yourself led you to your art, and how has your art led you to being more of yourself in this whole journey?
So interestingly enough, this past December, I guess it was after I started the show, as I was applying to the Fringe Festival, one of the questions on the application was, do you have any reviews or things like that? I didn't get reviewed this time around because I was not thinking of it as a theater piece. I thought it would be a standalone, short run or limited run in San Francisco, and that would be it. And so I went back and looked at reviews from the original show 10 years ago, and I found one. I had a pull quote on my website, and I went back and read the full article. And what the person said, and as I mentioned before, I do a lot of impersonations on the show. I do a lot of different characters of people. I guess they're real life people. I do impersonations of them in the show. And what the person said in their review was that Megan is incredible at impersonations. Their voices are so clear, they're so distinct. But I'm not sure, or the one voice that she needs to work on is her own. And it wasn't until I had already performed the show this December, so this is after I'd done the show, that I was like, this is so funny because this time around, going into this version, the whole second act I rewrote felt so vulnerable and so exposed. And I contemplated not even doing it and changing it and trying to be funny about it. But the second act of the show is very, very raw. It's very much just like me essentially being naked in front of everyone and being like, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I hope something resonates with you. And I was so afraid to do it. And there was huge, huge payoff. So I had this moment of thinking, I almost want to go contact that person and send them a video of the show
And
this
be like, I
time
want you
around
to
and
watch
be like,
this now. Thank you.
what do you think? What do you think
Yeah.
now? But it's interesting because I don't even remember having read that initially 10 years ago. So what a cool thing that I was able to read that and with conviction say, as I read that, I think I've now accomplished that. I think a lot of it comes with just being older as well. As we get older, we care less. And
Yeah.
we're like, well, it is what it is.
Well, I think also it's a building of confidence too, because very easily you could argue that then we didn't hear, or they didn't, the audience at the time didn't hear Megan's voice because Megan was afraid to share her voice. And so now you're like, I'm not afraid to share my own voice because there is a safety. I think that's why a lot of us are drawn to acting in particular. That's why everyone like did high school, theater in some way, or middle school, because it's like, it feels like it should be this big vulnerable thing, but it actually, a lot of people find safety in it because they're not being themselves.
Yeah. And I would challenge that thought too, is it's not that I'm not afraid. I was totally scared.
Oh yeah.
I was totally afraid to share myself, but I did it anyway. And it's this, I think, like I said, a lot of it's getting older. You're just like tired and you go, I can't fake it anymore. And I can't not say this because this just is what it is. If I make it up, it's going to feel odd or inauthentic or there's no point in saying it that way.
And also, as you get older, it correlates to the same amount of time that the amount of time that you've spent with your own thoughts. Of course, you believe them so much more now. Of course, you see more value and you're like, no, this is really scary, but I'm going to run at the danger and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to hold on. It's going to be so scary, but then it's going to be great after, because after you didn't die.
Right.
You got your message. And also you got to show more of your absolutely wonderfully beautiful self and your brain through your art to more people, and they got to see you.
Yeah.
And there's that understanding. I mean, energetically too, you can feel that in a room. That's the applause. It's not the applause. It's before the applause, but you're like, wow, they're really here with me. And not only are they seeing me, but they're witnessing my proof of my experience.
Well, it's no longer about your performance. It's about the reflection of what they see in themselves as you say something.
Yeah.
As you say something raw, as you say something vulnerable, people are able to then, it opens up the conversation for them to then reflect on what's going on in their, internally for them, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why Brene Brown is so popular, is this idea of capitalizing on your vulnerability.
Yeah.
But she's onto something.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that you kind of just adjusted my evolution of the definition of authenticity now. Authenticity is just turning on the light.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're turning on the light for other people to see.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
It's not even to see you, it's to see themselves
Yeah.
in you.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to just be naked.
Then I
Shit yourself in front of everyone.
Yeah. But that's the constant circle of like giving, where it's like if we all act more vulnerably, more truthfully, it's going to inspire others to do that. And that's like the real message of art.
It's an invitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an invitation for others to join you.
Where can people find you? Where can people get tickets to your show? Talk to about your show.
So you can find me at Lymphomaniac Show on Instagram or lymphomaniacshow.com. And I'm currently in the fundraising stages of going to Edinburgh because it is an expensive feat, let me tell you.
It's a massive accomplishment first to get in there and then to make it happen.
It's not just, it's like, yay, you made it. Now you need $25,000. Great.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel inspired by anything, love a little donation if you got the space for it, or just a shout out or anything like that. There's so many different ways to contribute, but lymphomaniacshow.com or at lymphomaniacshow on Instagram right now. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm info@lymphomaniacshow.com if you want to chat.
Stunning. I'll tag it in the show notes.
Hey,
thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And that's the latest. I'm honored to have been part of your thinking sphere today. Feel free to share, like, and subscribe on this platform, or follow and participate on any of my social media platforms. If this practice intrigues you as much as it does me, then join us in the Me3 community, where we will work directly and you will curate a mindful method of thinking to define your own creative conscious. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Authenticated. I love that you're here.